the voice of the disenfranchised. It is the voice of the 99%. It is the voice of rebellion. And so if those ideas were to find their way into management, into the world of work, into the future of work especially, it poses a significant threat to the established order. I don't think the established order wants the hip hop ethos, the culture, to permeate into their space.
Wow, that's a good perspective. I mean, yeah, I mean, your talk is nearing 2 millions, and that is like I shared it with my friends, and he was like, "Wow, I mean, this is something we thought of, and he's talking on it, and he's taking to a wider audience." We're like, your book,
Yeah.
Reinvent
And
Leadership.
leadership reinvented. And actually, what's really interesting about that TEDx talk, Abdullah, is that it was received well at the time it was delivered, recorded, and published, but it started to go viral very slowly. It started to achieve traction, I would say, in the last 2 to 3 years, and especially during the pandemic. I think that the ideas that are contained within that talk are more relevant than ever. And I somewhat regret making that talk about Gen X and Gen Y and the tensions that exist between the two of them, because I think that if I were to deliver the same talk and divorce myself of any specific generational markers, this talk could stand the test of time, I believe, 100 years from now, when we're talking about whatever generations are in conflict. It's really about the old epoch of work and the new epoch of work. And the dynamics and the strategies and the philosophies which undergird the talk, I think, are eternal. So I'm really just happy that, number one, that talk is getting to reach audiences all over the world. It's reaching people at a time when they need to hear this message, and in many cases when they don't want to hear the message but need to hear the message. And I consider myself to be very fortunate that more people like yourself are hearing what I have to say and are giving me the opportunity to elaborate on those concepts that I delivered and shared. Wow, almost 8 years ago now.
Yes. 2014.
2014. That's unbelievable. Time is flying, man.
I mean, thanks a lot, Hamza. Let's start with the show.
Sure, man.
I want to thank a lot for coming onto the show. I mean, this is kind of a inspiration where I can say, like, see, I got a renowned keynote speaker who has addressed at various universities. So thanks a lot for coming to the show. And one of my requests is, like, I'm falling in short of words to describe you, because you have been a keynote speaker at various world events, and you have your book, and then you went on to start a creative agency right at your college, 21. Now you're managing 4 to 5 creative agencies. So I want to hear a bit about yourself from you.
Absolutely. I would define myself as a keynote speaker, a author, very fortunate to have published 2 books now, The Burnout Gamble and Leadership Reinvented most recently. And I'm also a university educator. But it might help to synthesize all 3 of those different vocations into the outcome that I'm hoping to be true for people whom I work with, which is I help people to thrive in the future of work, specifically focusing on teams and leaders. But my heart is always with youth and early talent. So, I'm Hamza Khan. I'm a speaker, author, educator, and I help teams and leaders to thrive in the future of work, not just survive, but thrive. That's where I think we all need to go.
And I went through your TED talk, stop managing and start leading. So in the TED talk, you start with your personal narrative where your boss was like very angry with you coming 15 minutes late to the work, and you mentioned this line called "I was sacrificed at the altar of office discipline," and
Yeah.
and to follow and to follow with that line, you say, like, the startup ecosystem and the kind of ecosystem has from the knowledge workers is like they're not no more the factory management applies to these people, the millennials and the generation X and Y. So I want to hear from you your thoughts on the future of workplace and what is it going to be, and are we heading towards our ideal workplace, or it's like top companies are going to lead it and small scale companies are going to adopt to it?
That's a very good question. And, bonus points to you for remembering that very specific line. I forgot that I delivered that line. And, when you repeated it back to me, I thought to myself, wow, that was very eloquently put. So thank you for that reminder. It's inspiring me to bring my A+ game over here. I was already going to bring my A game, but man, I got to bring the A+ now, because now I know I'm speaking with somebody who's a true student. So teacher must appear.
Yes.
Okay. So I was asked about this last night. I did another podcast recording last night, and I was asked, how do you feel about the future of work? And I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, I feel very optimistic, but on the other hand, I feel, or I'm taking a much more realistic approach. And that realism sometimes tends to border on pessimism and even cynicism. So I'll tell you why I'm feeling or thinking about this realistically first, and then we'll go into the optimism. We'll start with the bad news and then go into the good news, Abdullah. So the bad news is this: I see that as a collective, and I mean like the subordinates and the leaders in this large vat of discussion and exchange about the future of work, we're fumbling our opportunity to make a truly substantial change in the right direction. And the right direction would be a more pro-human, human-centric, people-centric workforce. That's the opportunity that we've been presented by the pandemic. We have the opportunity to step into this portal, and that's a metaphor that has been presented by author Arundhati Roy, who said that historically, pandemics have forced people to break with their old world and imagine a new world. And this pandemic is no different. It is a portal between one world and another. So I think that we have the opportunity to step into this portal and leave behind some of our toxic and ineffective management and leadership practices in the BC world before coronavirus. I'm talking about the sort of oppressive, authoritarian, aggressive, and avoidant style of leadership that characterized at least the last century. And this is a style of management that is a remnant, a relic of a time long gone by. We're still managing, unfortunately, knowledge workers, even at the tail end of this pandemic, the way that factory workers were managed. I mean, you even think about the concept of the 8-hour workday. It's a very arbitrary decision to maintain that into this current era of work, because we're not factory workers, we're knowledge workers. We sit down for 8 hours a day, and technology is improving to the point where it's allowing us to do more in less time. We are being more effective with our time, more efficient with our time. More effective in our work, more efficient with our time, being able to produce more in less time. But we still feel beholden to the system that keeps us trapped within this 8-hour, I don't know another word to describe it, this 8-hour prison, if you will. And so those of us who are optimized for productivity during this time feel guilty because we suddenly have all this found time on our hands, but we make the mistake of filling it with more work because we inherently feel not enough in modernity. And those of us who are not able to get work done during this time, these 8 hours, are also feeling guilty. And especially during the early days of the pandemic, a lot of leaders said to their subordinates, it's time to roll up your sleeves and do more with less. We need to be innovative and figure this out. And that would have been fine for the first 3 months, 6 months, even a year. But now here we are 20 months into the pandemic and leaders are still insisting on this way of work. Microsoft put out a report, I think halfway during COVID-19, which showed the differences in working experiences for leaders and subordinates. And as you can imagine, Abdullah, leaders are having a great time right now because they have the permission space to show up when they want, how they want to work. They can come into the office. They can decide not to come into the office. The same rules don't apply to them. There's rules for them and rules for everyone else. Rules for me, rules for thee. Subordinates, on the other hand, have been at the receiving end of all of this downward trickling stress. And unfortunately, I think that we are not having the conversations about what do the employees need? What do the people need? What does the team need in order to navigate the future of work? What's happening, unfortunately, thinking back to a great book by Jocko Willink, The Dichotomy of Leadership, and he explains how leaders need to make the decision about how they're going to balance the focus, the prioritization within the workplace. A disproportionate focus on the mission of the organization sometimes comes at the expense of the needs of the people, and a disproportionate focus on the needs of the people sometimes comes at the expense of the mission. But what has happened during COVID is leaders have put emphasis on the needs of the mission. We need to outlast this pandemic. We need to survive the economic downturns. We need to make it through this period of great change. But it has come at tremendous cost to the health and well-being of the people. And so I'll end off with my realistic note over here, then go into my optimistic note very quickly. The manifestation of this realism is coming in the form of what's being described as the Great Resignation. McKinsey described how 50% of the workforce, roughly, around the world is 3 months away from leaving their current job. And what you're seeing happen en masse, and I'm sure this is true for India as it is for North America over here, people are voluntarily leaving their jobs. And even with wage subsidies ending, they're choosing not to re-enter into the workforce or work for similar types of organizations. And the fundamental mistake that leaders are making is misattributing why people are leaving. They think they're leaving because they're getting lazy, that they've gotten used to working from home, etc. That's not true. People don't quit jobs; they quit leaders, and leaders don't want to hear that. But that is the truth. Think about any time that you've quit a job. You didn't actually quit the working environment. You quit the person that was your buffer between yourself and the working environment, time and again. So that's why I'm, on the one hand, concerned that we're not having the right conversations, that we're treating the symptoms instead of the underlying sickness. But I'm also optimistic because for the first time, at least in my life and in recorded history that I have consumed, so I also understand that I have a very limited perspective here, but for the first time in what seems like an eternity, every worker in the world is having conversations about a better way to work. The pandemic has afforded us, it has gifted us the time and the space necessary to take a breather and say, wow, I was putting up with a style of leadership, with a toxic workplace culture, et cetera, et cetera. And even if they're not as critical as you and I are right now on this podcast, at least the ember of the idea is present with anybody who is in a working situation. It has given them the vocabulary, the basic concepts to have a bigger conversation. And that gets me really fired up, no pun intended, because I think that as a thought leader, and you also as a thought leader, us coming together, having this conversation, sharing it, if we do this at scale, then we can fan those embers and turn it into a full-blown conflagration. And that's what gets me really excited.
And this is one of the most epic kind of a response I had from a thought leader. I asked this question, I have asked this question to numerous people, like, what do you think the ideal state of workplace would be like? And people talk about a lot of reports which have put out by the MNCs, but this is something which I personally relate to. See, I was reading one of a comment where after your TED talk someone said like, your perspective is more of a North Americanish, because the kind of management principles you're talking to, that doesn't apply to a third world country like India or Africa or something. So on this note, I connected with you when you talked about hip hop and Jay-Z. So you say, when you talk about Jay-Z, you say leaders manage other leaders, like Jay-Z managing Kanye West, Jay-Z managing J. Cole. J. Cole is a significant rapper as of now. So I want to hear more on that thing. Like, what does a future leader look like?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And also the interesting, you classified India as third world. I imagine that there are parts of India that are third world,
Yes.
just as there are parts of Canada that are third world as well. I think as a whole, India would be classified as developing, but these are United Nations definitions, right? So I just want to clarify for any of the listeners over here that India, depending on where you are, is a remarkable country, and just as Canada is. But I'm sure that if you go into certain parts of India, you will see that unfortunately the guiding hand of capitalism hasn't been kind, as I'm sure, like I said, you can find here in Canada as well. So I just wanted to make that quick distinction, my man.
Well,
okay.
Yeah,
So
I think I was wrong on that note, but then you've corrected me.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So, sometimes we forget about this, right? And I think unfortunately there's this misconception, and I see this a lot in North America, of what India is and what it's like, and the ground truth over there. And I'm saying this is somebody who visited a long time ago. So of course, please correct me if I'm wrong over here, but there are parts of India, more parts than one would think, that are just beautiful, that are very progressive and forward thinking and booming, thriving, if you will. Now, of course, during the pandemic, it's very different. And this introduces another challenge, right? So Abdullah, we're talking about management and leadership in the context of knowledge work, but I'm sure that if we shifted gears and talked about what this looks like for quote unquote blue collar work, or work that is precarious in nature, then I would have to tailor my answers over here. So whenever you're ready for me to switch gears and talk about specific adjustments to those groups, I'm happy to do that. But in the meantime, I'll just assume we're talking about knowledge workers over here. So coming back to your question about hip hop, what is the role of a leader? Why did I position Jay-Z and J. Cole and Kanye West over there? That was really interesting. So one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got from one of my leaders, my mentors, was leaders create other leaders. They're neutral. not toxic. They don't take away. They're not operating from a place of lack and deficit and fear. They're operating from a place of abundance. So someone like Jay-Z is happy to produce another leader. Jay-Z wants to produce another Kanye, another J. Cole. He wants to create self-sufficient versions of the type of leader he's trying to become so that he can achieve his goal at scale. He can't do it by himself. And what happens when a leader becomes so self-centered, self-serving, and creates a cult of personality? That's how you end up with the Adolf Hitlers of the world, the Jim Joneses of the world, the Travis Kalanick's of the world. And it's so strange. What a spectrum, right? Like you have this despot tyrant, and then you have this cult leader. And then I just named, one of the early founders of Uber. So, Travis, if you're listening to this, sorry, man, I didn't mean to compare you to Hitler and Jim Jones. It just came out naturally. What I'm trying to get at over here is that these are leaders who have at one point in their lives tapped into, and not at least one point in this case, but well documented throughout their leadership. And Travis Kalanick, during the early part of Uber, tapped into what's known in the literature as the dark triad assortment of leadership traits. So the dark triad traits are subclinical levels of Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. And these traits, if operationalized within a functional limit, can actually be quite effective for you. To the extent that I would say Barack Obama is a narcissist and taps into this. Jeff Bezos, could be considered somewhat psychopathic and taps into this. And I don't know if they let it go to the extent where it collapses their leadership infrastructure, but know that in the literature, it's called the dark triad leadership traits, and leaders tap into this. But what they do in leaning further and further into the darkness below is they become more self-serving. They take from the people around them. They take from the environment. They take from the communities and the planet to feed themselves. But a neutric leader, one that leans into the inverse of the dark triad, the light triad traits, namely Kantianism, humanism, and faith in humanity, leads from the inside out. They're obsessed with creating more around them, of enriching and empowering the external environment. And so those types of leaders, and I would consider Jay-Z to be one of them, they are so happy when they create more leaders around them. And that is what the job of a leader should be well into the future of work, which is to create more leaders.
Well, that is kind of refreshing insight. I feel like I'm talking to a pro. I saw your talks, but then, when I'm talking in live, I feel like, wow, I'm talking to someone who's a real expert. Who has worked across various industry domains, and the kind of knowledge you bring to the table is like, I'm completely off you the way you're putting things. And think about vocabulary and growth. I saw one of your posts on how vocabulary, we say, I'm crushing it, I'm going to kill it, that kind of a vocabulary and growth. You're making a comparison between growth and how a kind of a usage of vocabulary can make you go towards it. So I want to know more about do you think our vocabulary, the terminology which we use at workplace, affects our orientation towards the work? How we think of work and the outcome of the work?
You're asking such excellent questions, man. And, for the listeners over here, there's two types of interviews that I do. There's interviews where I get the questions in advance, and then my natural reflex is to prepare answers and, write them out and then regurgitate them to the best of my ability. And then there's interviews like this where I go in completely dark. I have no idea what the questions are going to be. And so, I every time I answer, I'm in a bit of a free fall, and I find my wings, if you will. I build a plane on the way down, and I try to take you back up. So, Abdullah, thank you for this. This is a very exhilarating opportunity for me, and you're asking such fantastic questions. And I want to thank you, first of all. I mean this sincerely. You see me the way I hope to see myself, if that makes sense. And so, I've been on quite a journey in the last decade, going from somebody who perceived injustices and inequalities in the work world, and then gradually built up more competence, then confidence, and then permission space to be able to share these big ideas at the highest level. It's just so cool to hear from somebody who is able to connect with the person that was at the beginning of this journey. You know, I'm still Hamza. You know, you see me now in 2021, but deep down, I'm still the same guy that entered into the world of work more than a decade ago and thought to himself, there's got to be a better way than this. So it's really cool, Abdullah, that you see that person. Okay, so your question about vocabulary and how that changes your orientation in the workplace. Great question. So there's something known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. If you want to look this up, it's SAPIR-WHORF. And the gist of it is this: the language that you use changes your cognition. It changes the way you think. So I was talking to one of my executive coaches the other night, and she said she has a lawyer right now that's helping her to win a wrongful termination suit. And she said, I selected this lawyer because in his spare time, he plays chess and does boxing. And I thought to myself, wow, what a great leisure complement to the work of a lawyer that is fighting on your behalf. You know, quite literally fighting on your behalf. And so you want this person to subconsciously be programmed by the leisure, the work that they do outside of their practice as a lawyer. So chess is a game of conflict. It involves killing, maneuvering, outsmarting, outwitting, right? These are things that you want your lawyer to do. And then you think about boxing as a sport that involves punching, counterpunching, defense, you know, knocking down, so on and so forth. So this person is thinking through the language of chess and through the language of boxing and then through law. So I can only imagine how effective they are as a lawyer, where all of their time, energy, and attention is oriented towards the zero-sum game. I win, you lose, or you lose, I win. And I thought that was really fascinating to me. I have come up in a system that I would say at some points were characterized by like a sort of toxic quality. You know, we talked about leadership and management and work in war terms. And this is a very North American thing, right? We talk about setting targets, you know, crushing it, launching, firing, purging, bloodletting. There's all of this sort of war, violence, sport terminology that is what's the word I'm looking for here? The work as it has come to evolve is soaked in this vocabulary. And unfortunately, what it does is it creates an assumption for anybody just entering into the workforce that it's a zero-sum game, that you have to win at the expense of others, that your organization, that your budget, your team, your division, whatever the case may be, needs to succeed at all costs, that growth must happen for the sake of growth. And that assumption is there. And, you know, come what may, you need to win. And that's fine. I think that that's a really interesting impetus for work, but we're long past that we have shown now here at the tail end of capitalism, late stage capitalism, that style of thinking, that style of approaching business has been good for a very small group of people and not everybody else. You know, you think about the dichotomy of 1% of the population has, you know, some disproportionate amount of the world's wealth, like 99% of it. I don't know. But you even look at the pandemic, how people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, for instance, were able to funnel more money than they can spend in multiple lifetimes, while you have, you know, third world countries that are lagging behind and are even worse off than when they entered into the pandemic, and the wealth inequality globally has increased. So that to me is like an injustice of the highest order. That to me is all the evidence that we need to point to the system and say it's broken, it's not working, or maybe it is working exactly as it was designed, and that's a whole other story. But anyways, if we change the way, if we change our language in business, I think that will naturally change the way that we lead and run companies. And I was very inspired in 2019 when Mark Benioff of Salesforce went in front of all of his peers at the Business Roundtable and said that the purpose of business now transcends mere shareholder value. It's not just about creating value for the people that invested in us. It's about creating value for our teams, for our customers, for the communities in which we exist, for the countries and for the cities and countries in which we have headquarters, and for the planet and environment at large. And I thought to myself, that is beautiful, because that is changing the fundamental language of business. Business is no longer about being the lone standing company on the Fortune 500 list. That's not enough. It's not just about corporate social responsibility. It's about something much more transcendent. It is about holistic growth. It is almost like a callback to what businesses were, at the outset of commerce as we know it. If you had a blacksmith in a county, the blacksmith was also involved in creating the roads that would lead to their shop. And so the blacksmith simply didn't run their practice in their locale. They also were invested in the community and the well-being and prosperity of the immediate community, because then that tied directly into their profits and well-being. So I think we need to get back to that sort of understanding and recognize that the world is a lot more delicate and interconnected than we think. And COVID-19 has been such a powerful reminder of that, how one seemingly small event in Wuhan, China has reverberated to every corner of the globe. And we're going to feel its lasting effects at least until the end of 2022 if we're just thinking about the supply chain alone. So that's why I think, coming back to your initial question, Abdullah, we need to focus on the language that we use to try to remove as much violence from our language as possible, to try and remove suggestions of our time on earth as being a zero-sum game, to try and remove the male centricity of our language, to try and remove the North American and Caucasian centricity of our language. These things are going to take a long time to do, but you and I are already speaking in those terms to the best of our ability. So let's keep this going, man. I'm really glad you asked that question, and hopefully it'll inspire some of the listeners to also consider, decolonializing the way that they speak.
I mean, this is what I've been preparing for. But then, I was on a trek last week, so I came back yesterday, and I have a sore throat. But then I was like, when I scheduled this meeting like 2 days before, I was like, okay, should I do this or not? Am I prepared to face this personality or not? But then when I went through it, I was like, okay, I have this idea, so I should just ask and I should listen to them. I mean, this is kind of a student-teacher kind of a conversation which I want to have with you, and I'm glad that we're having such a conversation.
And Abdullah, you're going to be surprised, or maybe not, but I'm actually more nervous than you are in this conversation. You got to remember, man, I'm a very shy, socially awkward introvert, and I struggle with imposter syndrome. I never feel like I'm good enough. I never feel like the things that I'm saying are smart enough, or I never feel like the time that I spent with another person is valuable enough for them. So trust me when I say, man, don't be nervous. Don't overthink this, because I am in the same boat as you, man.
But the opposite, you've been an inspirational personality. Your videos have watched like millions, and one of your TED Talk is nearing to 2 million. You're like 2 times TEDx speaker. You have a book. I mean, a lot of people in my network, I see they tag you and they talk about you. Recently, you have been awarded Ashley Fellowship at Trent University. And I want to ask you a personal question. See, I mostly work with small scale companies. And when you're talking about the Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff and his talk on the business community and how we should think of the whole, not the part of making stakeholders happy. So I want to ask you this thing. I heard this line somewhere. I can't recall like who said this, but this line stuck with me, and it reads this way: business is ethics and ethics is business. So what's your take on this line? And how do you see business? What do you think when I said this, like business is ethics and ethics is business?
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think we lost our way. We lost our way somewhere in the last century, where greed became the driving force for leaders. And, you saw different manifestations of this take place, notably, with that very famous movie, Wall Street, where Gordon Gekko, it was a criticism of reckless capitalism. He had that famous scene where he said, greed, for all intents and purposes, is good. Yeah. And it was really disheartening to see people take that line and parrot it as motivation for their work, when in fact Oliver Stone wanted the exact opposite. Then you saw it happen even with The Wolf of Wall Street, right? People love the first half of the movie and they turn off the second half because it's too much. You don't want to see the consequences of that. You don't want to see the end result of that level of greed and reckless behavior. And that's really, when you get down to the level of detail, that's really what drove the 2008 financial crash. It's what drove, any of the unfortunate macroeconomic calamities that we've experienced in our lifetime. It's been people behaving unethically, going rogue. A tiny toxic few accepting amongst each other a certain level of not even malpractice. It's like just bad behavior.
Yeah, bad behavior.
And for that to go unregulated, I've been meditating on this idea. I think you'll be into this. And it's like, what is culture? Like, how do you establish organizational culture? And somebody, I can't remember if I read it or I heard it, but I've yet to break this theory, which is culture is the series of the worst behavior. The culture is the sum total of the worst behaviors you're willing to tolerate.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, wow, okay, that's really interesting. So what is the culture of Wall Street? Well, the culture of Wall Street is permitting people to invest recklessly. And, you saw it happen with the GME stock and Citadel Capital, Robinhood, and Wall Street all acting in cahoots because they realized the system was being broken by the populace and that they would lose their stranglehold on it. That to me is very fascinating because that reveals what the culture of Wall Street is. But beyond that, what the culture of, you can take it a step further, capitalism and neoliberalism is. And I get really upset when I see that because I think to myself, wow, the game is so stacked in their favor. The odds are so against the average person that we need to come together as a collective and use our combined economic power and political power to shake the system up, to disrupt it, because it's behaving unethically. The lack of ethical behavior is happening at a level that is trickling down, in my opinion, from the level of government to business, but then is also reciprocal because the way that business acts then influences the way that government acts. So I love that statement of business is ethics, ethics is business. And I would take it even a step further. Government is ethics and ethics is government.
Yeah, that is rightly put. And yeah, you should write an article about it. But that is something. Yes. I think a lot of people talk about how corporates influence governments and how corporates are getting into policy making of governments and such. This line, it boils down to that. Quite an insightful.
Especially in the US, right, where they have very powerful business lobbies that are influencing elections. And I think you saw the worst manifestation of this Donald Trump's election and all of the policies that he led and shut down and he was involved in. I mean, very much driven by the world of business.
Yeah, that is true. Very true. I mean, see, I'm in awe of, like, whenever we talk, like, this is something. I'm talking to a guy who comes with a lot of experience. And to wind up with that, I don't want to take your early mornings. I have a last question on that.
Sure,
so
man.
My question is on the role of management for the next generation. You see,
Okay.
for the millennials, there are different kind of. You have Instagram. You've been a award-winning digital marketer, award-winning keynote speakers. So I have this personal question to you: how you see the landscape of marketing changing, and because of the what we say the demographic. Now we're dealing with millennials mostly, and after that we'll deal with some extra people. So what do you think the role of management is for the next generation? You, I mean, when you say when I read your content, when I go through your content, an overview which I get to is like you state you manage things and you lead people.
Yeah.
So I want to hear.
I think there was two parts of that question. You asked me first about marketing and then management, or which one did you want me to answer, man?
Marketing.
About marketing specifically, how is marketing going to change? So marketing is being very much influenced by the shifting consumer behaviors and expectations. I think that the age of intercepting the user journey using things that are crude, like ads, for instance, or badgering users to part with their time, energy, attention, money, and other resources. I think those days are coming to an end. What we're seeing now is a convulsion. We're seeing the populace almost give up on traditional advertising. They're throwing it up. They don't want to respond. They're not even responding to ads the way that they used to. And I know this firsthand, having worked with and consulted for numerous organizations that have built their entire business model on running digital ads. Just the cost per acquisition is increasing. The conversions are decreasing. It's a disaster right now because the average consumer is becoming very savvy and very annoyed, in fact, with traditional ads. What they want, we're making that shift from, buyer beware, where at one point the companies held all of the information and they were able to, you know,
Manipulate.
perform their wizardry and manipulate and use creative wordsmithing to persuade, you know, this almost, they called it in the culture industry, cultural dopes, right? Like just very passive consumers. That doesn't exist anymore, because now it's
Yes.
seller beware, where the average consumer has just as much, if not more, information than the sellers. They can do their own research. They can validate their ideas within their communities and beyond. They can look at reviews, and you know, it's just more transparent the way business is done. So in order to earn business, and when you think about marketing, what is marketing? It's the act of taking something to the market. We've long left the very limited style of market that existed in our imagination, or at least in the old world, which is you go into a shopping mall and you're walking around and you have the intention to buy, and then you see all these signs and all of these ads and all of these things that are clamoring for your attention. Now it's very different. You know, most consumers are at home, and you know, they're thinking to themselves, they're going through their social media feeds, Instagram, TikTok, they're skipping the ads. They know when they're being manipulated in pop culture, when they hear product placement in a song or they see it on a TV show. You know, they get annoyed when they get 3 ads back to back in the same program. So what's actually happening right now is marketers are going to have to evolve and find ways to be there when the consumer seeks them out on their own. You can't intercept the user journey the way that you used to anymore. You now have to develop a brand, do exceptional work, hope to spread via word of mouth. And if somebody is searching for you because they either have a problem that needs to be solved, or they're doing market research, competitor research, or they're looking for something about you, be there, be presentable, and be able to articulate your values and how you make the world a better place. Because if you are not, as a marketer, preparing for this demographic shift, and make no mistake about it, this next generation, and increasingly every generation after that, will be motivated by something more than price. They'll be motivated by something more than solving an immediate need. It's going to be about helping the planet as a whole. And I have full faith in that. I have supreme confidence in that, because for the last 5 years, I've been teaching successive generation after generation of young people, at least mostly within North America, but even around the world, most recently at the World Youth Forum. And these conversations are happening at a level that I think avoidant marketers are going to be very shocked to learn about when the time comes where, you know, their tried and true tactics are no longer going to work. So that's my first answer. That's how marketing needs to evolve.
And the role of management for the next generation?
I'll keep this answer very succinct, Abdullah. Don't manage. Just everything you know about management, throw out that entire playbook. If you think that you need to manage, you're in the wrong place, man. Management should only be used as a last ditch effort. Management, and even then, I would argue that, you know, if you find yourself in a situation where you have to manage, maybe that's a reflection on your inability to lead. Like I said, you manage things like processes, but you lead people. And leadership at the highest level is about full ownership, end to end. So if you have success on your team, that is your handiwork as a leader. That is your guiding hand, your ability to remove obstacles and to nurture people, to be a servant to them, to help them achieve self-actualization. And if people are underperforming and projects are being stalled and the ball is being dropped at work, that is also the result of your leadership. Perhaps your inability to check in with your team, your inability to stack the team accordingly, to configure it, to optimize them, or to fire underperformers, right? There's no such thing as bad employees. There's only bad leaders. And if a bad employee exists at the organization, that means that you are tolerating them, that you are not helping them to exit. You are not firing them. You're not letting them go. And coming back to an earlier answer that I provided, culture is the sum total of the worst behaviors you're willing to tolerate. And so if you have a bad employee on your team, you as a leader are fostering a culture of underperformance, poor performance, or worse, a lack of ethics, an unethical culture. So my advice would be stop managing, start leading.
That is quite insightful. That is something which a lot of people don't dare to talk to, but then you have put it rightly. I mean, I think this resonates with a lot of people. And to follow up with that, I have this question.
Sure,
so
man.
When you say stop managing and start leading, so what do you think the role of these agencies like McKinsey, Boston Consulting, IDEO will be for the future generations, and what will we do in the future?
The thing that they should have been doing this whole time, which is talk to people. talk to their end users, talk to the customers, stop making decisions about people without them. This is so frustrating for me, especially from an equity, diversity, and inclusion perspective. You see a lot of these companies, and I'm not going to name names, but all you have to do is look at their about page. You go on their about page, you look at their leadership page, and you think to yourself, okay, so you are advertising in the Indian subcontinent, but I look at your leadership and they're all white men, right? So how are you making decisions about my people without the input of my people?
Help of, yeah.
You know, you're doing market research on us. You have a couple of surveys that you're running with some passive consumers. You're running focus groups, and then you're extrapolating. How could you possibly know the intricacies, the nuances about the people whom you're trying to reach? And then how are you benefiting us beyond this need? You know, yeah, sure. You know, in India, we need fun beverage options. But if that's coming at the expense of depleting entire rural communities of their water stores, I'm sorry, we don't actually need that.
Yes.
So what needs to happen is these companies, the large agencies, the small agencies, the marketing community worldwide needs to have an awakening, and they need to realize that, like Mark Benioff said, the purpose of their business now transcends account receivables, monthly recurring revenue, winning the Cannes Lion Award. That will come. Those things will come if you do good work. And what is good work is no longer just about things that are going to impress your peers. They have to impress the communities that you serve. They have to impress world leaders who are talking about climate change, who are talking about developing a sustainable, inclusive roadmap for COVID-19 recovery. That's the world that you need to help. The best minds in our world are unfortunately being tempted by Wall Street, by Silicon Valley, to solve problems that we don't have, that that don't need to be solved. I know we get our food as fast as humanly possible right now. You know, do I want to order a pizza and get it maybe 5 minutes sooner? Sure. But I would rather that the people that are going to spend their time, energy, and attention solving that problem, hey, take your talents elsewhere. Figure out how to get quality education to the most remotest parts of the world. Solve that problem. I'm okay to wait 5 more minutes for my pizza.
Wow, that is quite insightful. I think this is some kind of a, as I said previously, this is some kind of a, what you call, most people wouldn't dare to talk to, but the way we have put it, like, that is absolutely bonkers. I mean, I think more and more people should know about you. I mean, I've shared your TED Talk with a lot of people I know, and I think this conversation is going to go viral because the way we have put it and the way we have talked about management principles, workplace, and how we have brought in hip hop into management discipline. That is something insightful. So thanks a lot, Hamza.
And
thanks a
I
lot
appreciate that, man.
Thanks a lot for coming.
I'll just quickly add over here. Like, it took me a long time to get to this level of confidence. I think it's still very new for me because, up until quite recently, I was still technically employed by an organization. I had to be very careful about what I said and how I said it, and what my true feelings and attitudes are towards leadership as a whole. But now I'm in a different space, and the space allows me to just be free as a thought leader, as a speaker, author, and educator. And that has come with, a long journey of leading organizations, managing organizations, being an effective leader, being an ineffective leader, being led by effective leaders, and being led by ineffective leaders. So there was like a full spectrum of lived experiences that have preceded these thoughts the way that you're receiving them today. But I feel very grateful, Abdullah, that you have validated me. You have seen me. You have given me a platform to share these ideas with others. And it's motivating me actually to continue to do this at the highest level, because I don't know many people out there who are speaking about the world of work the way that you and I are. They're out there for sure. I know many of them. Many of them are my peers, but I feel like this conversation is not happening as frequently or as intensely as it needs to happen. And I want to thank you actually for giving me the time.
Pleasure is mine.
To do this, and especially with the time zone differences. I'm a morning person. It's very early for me over here in North America. It's very late for you over there in India. So thank you, man. I appreciate your time, your energy, your attention, and your trust.
I mean, the pleasure is mine because I showed your profile, I showed your views, and I said to my friends like, I'm hosting this guy, and everyone was like, "Are you mad? Will you accept?" This guy has 2 million views on YouTube, and do you think he's coming to your podcast for just to talk about stuff? So this is kind of a surprise to my friends who said like you're not able to get him, but then I got it. I mean, thanks a lot, Hamza,
We'll
for
do
coming
this
on the
again.
show.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and I hope to meet you soon. If any time I come to
Absolutely.
Canada, for sure I'll most pleasure to meet you. So on a
And
closing
vice
note,
versa.
thanks a
And
lot.
vice versa.
Yes, yes. Thanks a lot for coming to the show, and I'm going to end this meeting. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Hamza.
Thank you, man. Have a good night.